and we are good to go, Sabrina.
All right. Welcome to the January 11th work session of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order and entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, moved by Franzen, seconded by Perez. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, nay? Passes 7-0. Director Perez, will you please read our purpose statement?
Eric, can you scroll down a little bit? Or go to there we go. The Ames Community School District commits to equity and access that empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential.
Thank you. Okay. And then we will go into our discussion items. And our first one is overview of secondary model for return to face-to-face learning. And I will turn it over to Superintendent Reisner and her administrative team.
Thank you. So we wanted to give you a brief overview of the work that has been done on our secondary model for return to face-to-face. Again, we are currently in hybrid, and our plan would be to be able to make a recommendation if all is stable in the community and among staff to return face-to-face at the beginning of second semester. And so we asked Principal Michael and Dr. Nyberg if they could come and provide an overview of the work they have done. And so I will turn it over to those two principals.
All right, well, thank you, Superintendent Reisner. We'll wait for Eric to share the document, present the document. Okay, perfect. Dr. Nyberg and I had an opportunity to meet with some of our respective staff members about designing a learning model that will that we're hoping to implement for second semester. This model will allow opportunity for more students, for students to be in school more over a course of 2 weeks, but also address some of the concerns that we've had in the beginning of the school year in regards to the load that we are asking of our teachers to take care of, with them having the responsibilities of teaching both in the remote campus as well as students in person. Dr. Nyberg will start off and kind of talk through the Ames High School schedule, and then I will talk through the middle school schedule, and then we'll definitely entertain questions that you all might have. My focus team of teachers, there are several of them that are present tonight, and so if there are questions that are specific to teachers, we can certainly elevate them to panelist status and answer questions as well. Dr. Nyberg.
Awesome, thank you very much, Mr. Michaels. So as you know, our current schedule runs 7:50 to 2:30, with the notion of 2:30 to 3 o'clock or 3:30, providing teachers an opportunity to plan to touch base with students who are all remote, to offer interventions in office hours, and to kind of grapple with the competing needs of both serving their classrooms for both in-person and remote students. So the best way for us to do that with that compressed day was to offer odd and even block days, so that we could have 25-minute intervention time. So what we're proposing is to lengthen our class day. That will give us a little bit more time to play with in terms of our day-to-day period schedule, which is what's below is the scheduling alternatives. This will condense all of our planning into one day of the week on Friday, but that would still go for teacher planning, intervention, and office hours, with our school day being 7:50 to 3:20. teachers already have a dedicated plan period and a PLC period within their 1 through 8 schedule. They would continue to have that. This would just provide some concentrated time for planning those different learning models. As Mr. Michael was saying, we have found that it's very, very taxing for teachers to go back and forth with a lot of our students and a lot of our teachers feeling like it's just not working for everyone. If we are 100% in person, particularly, there is a lot of apprehension and stress that the students who are still all remote will get lost in the process. In addition to that, we are also looking at our core areas, providing them with some additional scheduling of remote and in-person sections so that we can make sure that we are serving the needs of our students who are remote as well as our students who are in person. So it would just elongate the day and collapse our plannings into one day instead of 1 hour per day. Do you want me to discuss how we got here?
Yes, if you can talk about the high school process.
Sure. So we started this conversation back in October. We had an all-staff meeting to discuss what would it look like to go back in person. At that time, we were looking at maintaining the 7:50 to 2:30 and what that would look like, or extending our day and collapsing that time. From that, we have had several conversations with our department liaisons and our building leadership team, which I just constituted the building leadership team at the beginning of December, and have had multiple conversations with these two bodies to kind of represent and take back information to their spheres of influence and gather input and support to finally not vote, but say that a majority would prefer to have that 1 day of planning period versus the five hours per week. And specifically, we are wanting to make sure our students and our parents know that their teachers are still offering interventions and office hours in addition to planning during that time. Teachers are not required to do so, but just like they do from 2:30 to 3:30, they are offering that time. Many offer that time as a touch point, particularly for those kids who are not in person.
Dr. Nyberg, could you please help me understand that just a little bit better? I was going to ask that question. So how does it work when Friday is intervention day, but students aren't there?
They're remote, and it works differently for the student's situation. So that could be a time when a teacher, like we're having this meeting now, using Zoom or Google Meet to do that. In some cases, kids come into the building and meet with teachers one-on-one. For example, during our all remote time, we had a number of students who came to the building during that time for in-person interventions to make sure that they didn't fall behind and they were able to catch up. So it's very student specific and class specific, depending on the needs.
So there would, in theory, be students in the building on Fridays.
There could be, yes. I would say could be, because in this model, it's not an attendance day per se. So we're not necessarily taking attendance, but any students that we make arrangements to be in the building, of course, we're then responsible for them and report back. If they don't come in or if they leave early, then we are sure to communicate that out to parents and such.
And you had said that the teachers could offer that, they weren't required to offer that. Is that the same for office hours, or are office hours required? I'm just trying to understand it better.
Yes. Yes, it is not required for students or teachers. It's set aside as a planning time first. However, within that planning time, teachers have found that it's a very good touch point for students, particularly those who are all remote, because it's a designated time that students have already mentally, they're in school until that 3:30 time. And we've told students many times that they are still working on school.
I guess the thing my last point, it would help me understand better, is because it's specifically, intervention is specifically listed on Fridays. And so if it's not required and it's optional, are there still expectations for intervention between Monday through Thursday?
Yes. So if you look underneath the scheduling alternatives, we would maintain our daily plus period. So that is our 25-minute block time during the other 4 days to provide that in-person intervention, and as well as remote students who are in remote campus can still join in those interventions and sign up for those interventions. But we found that when we give them more options, they're able to take advantage of those additional options.
Thank you.
What about transportation for the students that would be coming in on Friday?
And that's been, so we have worked with transportation when we were all remote, and we have also had our student family advocates go and get kids and bring them in. So it depends on the situation. With buses still running to elementaries, they're still running on a cycle. So in some cases, like the last time we were all remote, we just had them run their regular schedules, and they just picked up who they picked up and brought them in. And we took attendance with them when they got here in the building. We set them up in particular locations and then had them meet with teachers after we took that attendance.
They wouldn't necessarily be there all day though, right?
No.
Thank you for putting this together, Dr. Nyberg. One question I would have, just looking as kind of a parent community member, that I think some people might ask about. I'm sure you've got a reason. Why Friday instead of Wednesday?
It's more of the continuity of making sure that to touch base with students more frequently. As you might imagine, a lot of our shifting back and forth has created a lot of confusion and disruption. So this provides us a strong 4-day-a-week touch point, with that 5th day being a little bit less structured in that same way.
Great, thank you.
I know the question was directed to Dr. Nyberg, but there's an additional point too. What we notice across the system is that our biggest shortage in subs typically happen on a Monday or a Friday. And so this will also assist the system when it comes to sub shortages.
And Dr. Nyberg, I'm reflecting on one of your recent communications to families about the DMAC courses. Because all of that, I'm assuming that this schedule works with, I know DMAC courses are all online, but this would continue to accommodate the students who take classes, say at DMAC or at Iowa State.
Absolutely, particularly with our start time, that wouldn't interfere. So we have 2 chunks of time, both in the one in the AM and one in the PM, that releases students from classes at the high school so that they can participate. So that wouldn't change. And
Okay.
those periods would probably adjust a little bit depending on exactly what bell schedule we would go with, but they would still have that same basic chunk of time.
Okay. And
I think we allocate 3 or 4 periods. I can't remember.
okay, thank you. Well, I know when the move was made for our high school to go to the block scheduling, some of it was to better accommodate some of those classes. So I didn't want to assume, though. I figured you had a plan. So I appreciate you
Not a problem.
sharing
And
that. Yeah.
just to clarify, we still haven't settled in on what the bell schedule is. I'm still soliciting more feedback from teachers, because as you know, I think last year we had the modified block. So we're talking about either returning to the modified block or staying in block, or 1 through 8 period day. So we haven't exactly landed on that. But one of the decision, or one of the concerns or talking points would be, how do we make sure that we serve our students who are taking classes elsewhere outside of the building?
Okay, so I think you just clarified for me. So it would be, when it's that under the scheduling alternatives, you're referring to that first point, that it would be 1 through 8, or it could be that your student has, we'll say, math Monday and Wednesday if you're in the odd even schedule, or it could be that they have it all 4 days, depending on what you all decide.
Yes, or
Okay.
you have 2 full day, or 2
Mhm.
1 through 8 period days, and then 1 odd, 1 even.
Gotcha. So you're all still working through that, it sounds like. Okay. And then on the Friday, my assumption is on the intervention or the office hours, I know in the hybrid schedule, there have been opportunities for students to, call and do Google Meets with their teachers. My assumption is that would still be available if a student wanted a 30-minute meeting on a Friday with a teacher or something like that.
And yes, and that's why we have that. We've listed it as intervention and office hours, so that both teachers and students had that flexibility to continue those outside of, still during the school day, but outside of the rest of the week to have those meetings.
Got it. Well, thank you for you and your staff for your work on this. As a high school parent, I can see some of the things that you're trying to hit at and appreciate your work. So thank you.
I just have one question, Dr. Nyberg, that's related to schedule, but also sort of not related. It was a question that I had from a community member about choosing, the deadline for choosing remote or in person. Do you know when there will be information provided to families about how the structure would work for remote students in the spring, and like which classes would be through Edgenuity, which would be through Ames High? Do you know when that would be available?
My apologies. I meant to put that in the last newsletter or the last parent email, because we are maintaining the same balance of Edgenuity. I think we're picking up 1 or 2 additional classes, but
Okay.
other than that, we are maintaining the same kind of split for the same reasons. I would like to emphasize that Ames High's teachers very much wanted to continue actively teaching their students, and took on the challenge of doing the in-person and the remote. And we're very vocal about wanting to do that. So we don't want to add any additional wholesale Edgenuity classes. We want to keep that still to a minimum, for the reasons that we stated before, which is it's hard to do a lab science, with students who are not in the building. And then with ELA classes, it's hard to maintain that same level of connection and supervision and even feedback to students who you're not necessarily seeing on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Dr. Nyberg. I want to move on to Principal Michael. I know we have a hard stop time today of 6:30, and so I want to make sure that we have a time to cover Dr. Jones's presentation as well.
All right. Eric, if you can scroll down to the middle school. Before we get into that, there's a few things that I wanted to add that applies to both schools. Number one of the considerations that we needed to take is that there is some proposals or some conversations happening at the legislative body about changing or shifting that or moving away from a hybrid approach. I'm not well versed in that, but this model for the middle school and high school that's being put forward still allows us to meet the 1080 hours by the end of the school year. So even with us increasing the school day 4 days a week and not having student contact on that Friday, we would still meet the 1080. And then the other thing too is that, of course, when we have, I think this is something that you're clearly understanding, that with us having 100% of our kids back, even with, in our case, in our building, 60% of our kids back, we just really can't ensure social distancing in the classrooms or in the cafeteria. So I just know I wanted to make sure that that was brought forward and that's clearly communicated to the board as well as our community. For the middle school schedule, our current student day is 8 a.m. to 2:40 p.m., Monday through Friday. So essentially, students are in person 5 times every 2 weeks. Our model that we are bringing forward would have students in the building 8 times every 2 weeks. Our current periods last 45 minutes. By extending the student day, they would move from 45 minutes to 52, and in some cases 53 minutes. We currently have periods where they might, all of our periods work out to be 45 minutes this year, but with this shift, we will have some that will be 52 or 53. Currently, our teachers have what's called a virtual period as well as a planning period. In this new model, we would be eliminating that virtual period and we would be shifting that time to our Friday. There is a difference between what the high school is proposing with what they're going to do on Friday as opposed to the middle school. Because we are shifting time that we were giving to teachers spread out over the course of 5 days, we are at the middle school, it would be considered a primarily planning day for our teachers. So it'll allow for PLCs to take place. It would allow for them to record lessons for the following week, allow them to catch up on communication, so on and so forth. So ours will be primarily what we would consider planning time for our teachers on Friday. The one thing that is different, or one thing that is still outstanding, I know that our district leadership has begun conversations with the association. The student day, as it's in front of you, ends at 3:30. And if you look at the teacher day, their day by contract ends at 3:30. Our teachers do have duties at the end of the day. And so we are hoping through some additional conversations with our association that we would be able to incorporate approximately 12 hours of parent-teacher conference time that does go towards that 1080, which then allows us to release our students at 3:20 p.m. So there's a potential that it would be, the student day would be 8 a.m. to 3:20, and then 10 minutes, of course, reduced from the high school as well. In terms of our process that we used at the middle school, if you recall, in October, we had a board meeting and we kind of talked through some of the logistical challenges that we were experiencing with having students, with having teachers being able to provide instruction both to remote campus as well as in person. It does look different at the secondary level. Our elementary schools have remote campus teachers, and that's really the impetus as to why we need to look at our approach a little bit different at the secondary level. On October 26th, I met with my entire staff and we talked about different options. And if you remember from the October meeting, one of the things that we were investigating or looking into was having a remote campus for our student population and our teachers, having teachers that were specifically allocated to remote campus. As we begun to look into that as a possibility, there were some glaring things that came up that would actually, in some cases, make the work much more demanding of our teachers. So for example, when we have teachers that there are only specific teachers that teach one content area, well, there's no way that we could have a remote campus teacher. So for example, our accelerated math courses, right? And so, and I'll pick geometry. There's only one teacher in our building that's certified to teach geometry. And so there's no way that we could allocate her just to be a remote campus teacher because she still has geometry students showing up in person. And it's not just that content area. We have orchestra, we have fine arts, we have quite a few teachers that we call singletons. So when we discussed that with our entire staff, we then put out a survey, and the option to look at remote campus, having just remote campus teachers, that was the least favorable option that the staff chose. So almost 43%, so 42.9% of the teachers that responded. We had 77 teachers respond to that survey. Close to 43% were not in favor with moving forward with a remote campus. And so we provided them with 3 options, and that last option was just to develop a focus team and begin looking at other options. And so that gained the most, that there was 52% of staff that were in favor for that. So then what we did was then have a focus team that met starting in November 18th, and we met a total of 5 times and discussed, 9 teachers that were present for that. And we discussed different models, and we talked about the pros and cons. And this is the one that gained the most support that we put forward. So the teacher's voice was definitely a part of this process. Any teacher at my building who wanted to be a part of that focus team could be a part of it. No one was turned away or denied that opportunity. It was open to all, and 9 teachers were the ones who decided to do that. So by adding 7 minutes to it helps us to have more instructional time. I know 7 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but when you have to cut class shorter so that you can do sanitizing, those minutes adds up. So that's a solid 7 minutes that we can gain back each period, and it allows for more things to happen within that class period. So having longer periods also is a benefit to our students. I'm just trying to think through other things that I wanted to, and Dr. Nyberg said this, the consistency, initially we thought about Wednesday, but then thinking about what was best for students, having that 4 days straight through, that consistency was something that our teachers thought would be much more beneficial to our student population. I think I kind of covered all of my talking points, so I would be open to any questions.
So I'm sorry if I missed it or I don't understand. So then what happens to the students who are in remote campus? Are they going to experience a change in teacher?
So no, so we're not moving forward with a remote campus. So our classroom teachers will still be responsible for their students that are in remote campus. We sent out communication prior to winter break about some slight changes to the scheduling for second semester. And that was primarily because right now our class sizes are pretty large because of having that additional virtual period in the Teacher's Day. So by eliminating that, we've opened up a period on each teacher's roster so that we can reshuffle kids that they see throughout the day, so that we can make the class sizes a little bit smaller. So for the most part, students should still have their same teachers that they have currently. There might be a very small percentage, if any, that might have to make some adjustments with other teachers. But for the most part, we're pretty confident that we can keep teachers and students together. But there might be a change of like when they have that teacher in the day.
I might have missed it, but I thought I heard you say at the beginning that Fridays at Ames Middle School were going to be handled differently than at the high school. Did you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the high school will be doing interventions and so on and so forth. Our teachers, because we're shifting, taking away that 2:40 to 3:30 time that they have now, we're just shifting that over to the Friday. So we will be using that primarily for planning for teachers. So we will not be using that as intervention time like the high school would be.
Will they have opportunities to meet with students during that time, remotely potentially if students had the need?
As Dr. Nyberg said, it's not going to be a requirement. So if there are teachers that decide to utilize that time in that fashion, of course we wouldn't get in the way of it, but it's not an expectation.
Thank you for all the work both of you and your staffs have put into this. It looks like a lot of thought's gone into it. Thank you for all that. I guess the one question I'd have is, both of you, this is a few weeks away. How confident are you now going into this that you're going to be able to execute it, and any things that you're still worried about that we should know about?
Yeah, so extending the day doesn't change the plans that we've already had regarding the changes that we were going to make to the master schedule in order to be able to transition to 100% in person. So we begun that work already at the middle school. There was 3 stages of the process to be able to prepare for this transition. We've already completed 2 of the stages. The 3rd stage is where we're at currently, which is just balancing out class sizes for 2nd semester, and for a few cases, just kind of going in and hand scheduling a few of the kids that still don't have a schedule that's complete. So we are on track to have these changes completed before the 2nd semester.
We are we're a little more behind than the middle school because of the complexity of our system and the various requirements and needs, but we are working hard to get our kids re-rostered and get them balanced out. I think by virtue of pulling some of our core classes apart in terms of offering remote sections and in-person sections, that will also help to balance out a little bit better than we've had for this school year so far. But we're still in the process of doing those things.
How much will it impact you, or how much are you expecting in terms of if we have, I won't make an assumption, but if we have a number of students who transition currently from remote to in-person at the 3rd quarter, and then it sounds like also that option is being offered for the beginning of the 4th quarter, how much juggling will that require of you and your staffs, and what does your plan look like for that?
It will be a lot less juggling than we currently experience for the 1st semester, but that's when we'll have to reassess whether or not we can maintain the separate remote sections and in-person sections, and whether or not we have to collapse those. Again, most of the reason why we're going that route is to, again, provide a more stable platform for students who are remote to be able to check in with teachers, and as well as to lessen the back and forth the shifting that teachers have had to do while they're teaching in every day, but also to balance out our numbers a little bit better for that 100% in person. We are still working hard with some of our departments to kind of try to problem solve what are some fairly significant imbalances.
And then for the middle school, the changes that are currently happening are the significant changes that need to happen in order for us to not experience hardship with transitioning kids from remote campus to in-person. So it's a lot of work that's happening right now. But again, that work should be done fairly shortly. And so then when we get into, and that includes balancing class sizes and reducing class sizes. So if all kids decide to return from remote campus to in-person, we would be able to accommodate that in the 2nd semester.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You both mentioned that you won't be able to maintain full social distancing that we have. What's the implication there for, I get emails all the time from the middle school about students that have tested positive or staff, but it always follows by through tracing, they weren't close enough with anybody. I don't know if this is a question for Kathy or you two, but how is that going to change here 2nd semester? Are we at risk of having more students maybe have to go into quarantine?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to be transparent and say there is a greater possibility that we'll have more kids who will have to be quarantined because we won't be able to maintain 6 feet of distance between them.
And same for the middle school. So what has the strategy that has helped us to not have kids in quarantine or be considered close contact has been the fact that every classroom has been able to maintain 6 feet of social distancing. Even at lunchtime, we were able to maintain 6 feet of social distancing. And that's why I made that point abundantly clear in the beginning. Social distancing is no longer a reality when we move into the 2nd semester. So we would expect or anticipate that. To what degree, I wouldn't know, but that we would probably have more close contacts.
I would agree with that as well.
Thank you both so much. I want to move on. So if there are additional questions, the board can send those to me and we can work on getting the answers to those for you. So I want to turn it over to Dr. Jones. This is something we've been talking about for a while, letting the board know that we would come with the equity action plan. That's the process that we use for MTSS responses for students who need some assistance or need some change. So Dr. Jones, I'm going to turn it over to you. You're on mute.
Good evening, everyone. All right. I just wanted to also chime in with Superintendent Reisner and just grateful for our secondary administrators, Principal Michaels and Dr. Nyberg and their team, always being innovative and creative and forward thinking. And I just really appreciate that because that excites me. And to me, it speaks to our commitment to equity and specifically for this conversation, access. And so our ability as a school district to look at our schedule and see what can we do differently to be able to meet the needs of our students. So I just want to say I really appreciate that team. I do have the chart here, but I wanted to kind of start off with a little, you know me, I like to start with a little reflection piece in order to kind of guide our conversation. And I know we're tight on time, but I think it helps us kind of frame what we were thinking when we developed this particular chart. Eric, could you share? I wanted to share my screen. Okay. We just wanted to frame our conversation a little bit here. That's it. I'm gonna move it here. Got this little. Are you able to see my presentation?
We can just see like half of it, and then now maybe not even half, just like a little sliver of it.
That's still the same. Let me take this off here.
Now
How about
it's
now?
now it's just a black line.
Nothing.
Nothing except for just that black line down the middle.
You want to
Now
share it
it's
with
you.
me, Anthony, you can share it with me and I'll throw it up.
Okay. Well, I guess that's a clear sign that I need to share it. Okay, Eric, I'm gonna go ahead and go without it. So if you can put that chart back up again.
All right, we'll do.
So just to frame our conversation here, there's a story I ran across called the streetlight effect. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's pretty much like a parable that kind of like make fun of how we as as people have a habit to seek solutions in familiar and easy places. And sometimes we have a tendency to miss the real solution. And there's a story called the streetlight effect. And it's about on a dark evening, a police officer sees a man crawling down on his hands and knees, searching for something under the streetlight, and asks what he's looking for. So the police officer asks the man, what you're looking for. The man, who is actually, as the story is told, is actually drunk, and says that he lost his keys. Interesting concept here, right? Together, they both get on the ground. They start looking for the keys. And after a little short time, the officer looks up and says to the man, "Are you sure you lost your keys here?" The man replies, "No, I actually lost them in the park." And in amazement, the police officer asks the man and says, "So why are you looking for your keys under the streetlight?" And the man responds, "This is where the light is." So in terms of how we do, when we're trying to problem solve. Are you all able to hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Yes.
So in terms of looking at equity work, there's a habit that we have that we tend to look at the things that are most under the light. And in order to be able to do some real work around equity, we have to look in those shadows in dark spaces. And so what we wanted to do is kind of give you a visual, because the last time we met, we talked about how are the children. And so we used the image of a step, because in equity work under the Maslow's hierarchy of need, there are particular steps that we need to make sure that we do not skip in order to reach that self-actualization that Maslow talks about in his theory. And oftentimes when we talk about equity work, we tend to skip the step of creating a sense of belonging. And so when we look at that chart, what we try to do is show some of the areas that we have been successful in meeting the needs of our students. And so with that chart, you can kind of see there that the green area represents the areas that we've met the needs. Of course, there's some always room for improvement. The yellow represents the need. There are needs in progress. So we have some things in progress. They're not totally in place, but we do have some things in place, and we're still working on being able to meet those needs. And then there's the urgent need that we have in orange. So if you look at that chart and hopefully you had a chance to look over it, what questions do you have in regards to the chart? And then we'll go down to talk about our response.
Dr. Jones, thank you for putting this together. I really appreciate it. I did preview the presentation. I guess my question would be, how consistent is this and the particular levels across the 8 buildings? I'm asking, are all 8 buildings green where you show green? Are all 8 buildings yellow where you show yellow?
Yes, consistently across. So for instance, if you look at food assistance, this is data pulled from serving our families, our entire families in the district. When you look at the technology assistant, yes, PK-12 throughout the district. When you look at the language support, so it's fairly consistent across the district. One of the things when I look at even the teacher-student relationship, and Aaron put together wonderful data there, and we're still looking at the Panorama survey from our recent online survey, and we were able to see some significant responses from 3rd through 5th grade, and then 6th through 12. So of course, in that Panorama survey, we don't have PK through 2nd grade families. But even as you look at our community partnerships and the goals of trying to increase the staff diversity, we are doing fairly well across the district. Thank you for that question.
And is the inclusion of the first grade cohort because of the, primarily because of the reading scores that you've seen, or is there other things driving the inclusion of the first grade cohort?
Yes, we wanted to make sure that the data that we shared with you tonight was in response to the data that we shared with you before the break. And so also it helps us to focus. We know that first grade is that tough area when you're talking in terms of seeing growth. And so we really wanted to focus in on that first grade cohort specifically for this year to be able to address those students, because if we don't begin to address the gaps that we saw based on our fast screen data, then we're going to see some significant issues later on. So we really wanted to kind of hone in on our first grade cohort.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. And also at the top of the chart, you see the ELs and students of color. We really wanted to make sure that we're focusing in on some targeted groups. And again, as you recall from the data that we shared with you in December, in terms of demographics, these are the groups that were struggling the most. And so we continue to want to focus in on our English learners, as well as our students of color, specifically our Black students and our Hispanic students. We also talked about the homeless students, but when you look at the data, you will see some different backgrounds intersect. And when we really drill down in the data, you will see more likely a higher percentage of our Black and our Hispanic students in that area for homeless. And plus, to be able to share that data is a confidential data. And so we wouldn't really be able to pull those students out and bring them in front of the staff. And so we'll have to keep that group in my office in terms of focusing in on our homeless students and making sure that we're doing some check-ins across the district to make sure those families are succeeding in our district. So we want to focus in on those groups for urgent needs.
Dr. Jones?
Dr. Jones?
Oh, go ahead.
I'll just be real quick, Alan. My question is slightly indelicate, and so I apologize. But you say there's based on the data, we want to focus on our Black students and our Latino students. And I'm curious, are you looking for people who identify single race, single ethnicity? Or are you looking at students who hold those identities, even though they may be multicultural?
Yeah. So when we look, as we look at the data that we shared, it was clear that our Black students, again, this is over the past 3 years, so not just the recent data and the recent situation with COVID. We know that over the past 3 years, that those students in particular have been struggling in our district. So it's not just in response to COVID-19 in our current situation. We want to see where we can get the most bang for addressing the issues. And so, however, we do know that picking a single group, there's going to be some cross intersections over some other areas. For instance, students with IEPs as well. So we know that focusing in on those groups, we'll be able to cross over some different areas to address their needs.
I think, Dr. Jones, you might have just started to address what I was wondering. I was going to ask, is this effort disjoint from what might be done for students with IEPs, so students with dyslexia, students with other reading issues that might start to be seen at that age? Because if I remember right, that's another subgroup that we really want to make sure we focus on and catch as early as we can. How does that intersect with this?
Yes, and that's another great question. And one of the things that I didn't get a chance to share at the beginning is that these efforts are made across departments. So working with our coordinators in our special education department, as well as in our English language department, we are all working together to make sure that we're looking at the areas where we can meet the most needs, right? And so again, being able to realize that when we look at assessing, so again, if I want to highlight our Black students, when we look at the data, oftentimes we're not seeing our Black students assessed for dyslexia. And so we want to be able to use what, like, for instance, focusing in on foundations and really providing some of the instruction using some of the curriculum that we already have in the district. And foundations is one of those instructional materials that we are currently using. So being able to focus in on first grade and kind of tweak some things a little bit better in that grade group, we believe that we'll be able to meet those needs of the students that we're seeing pop up in the data.
And Dr. Jones, I'm just giving you, I don't want to interrupt your rhythm, but I'm just giving you
Mhm.
a 10-minute warning.
Okay, thank you. So if you go down under the chart, there are a few questions. So I want to highlight one of the notable findings that Erin was able to share with us. And again, this is from our recent distance learning panorama survey. It was something that she brought to our attention, and I wanted to be able to share that with you because I thought it was, we want to see some positives out of our data, and I wanted to be able to share that with you all tonight. But we noticed from the data that we collected that 80% of our 3rd and 5th grade students responded favorably to the question, do you have a teacher or other adult at school whom you can count on to help you no matter what? And we had 80% of students in 3rd and 5th grade to respond favorably. We also saw 74% of 6th through 12th grade students respond favorably to the same question. And so, again, it speaks to the work and the efforts that our school buildings, our teachers, our staff are doing to be able to make that connection with our families during this difficult and unusual time. And for us to have students to be able to respond 80 to 70% is really commendable to our staff. And so I wanted to highlight that. Another notable finding, the district has made considerable strides in providing language services to students and families. And so just a shout out to Shirley Santiago, our EL coordinator, and the team that she works with, our EL teachers, and our HR department being able to work with us to be able to hire interpreters and translators, and to be able to work and schedule out times to be able to get them to our teachers and our families to be able to help support our EL families. And so it's been great. And so I'm glad that we were able to highlight that. Also, looking at our student engagement has been a challenge during the pandemic. Of course, we all know that. And then many groups who were struggling before COVID-19 hit continue to struggle during COVID-19. So we wanted to be transparent about that. There was no miracle pill to be able to close any academic disparities that we've seen during this time. As I said before, under that line there, the target groups that we're really focusing on are our 1st grade cohort, our Black students, and our Hispanic, Latinx English language learners. I'm not going to read through all of the responses, but I do want to highlight a few. And Director Beerbaum, I know you asked a question about other groups, and so I wanted to highlight that first bulleted point is that we want to be consistent embedding Tier 2 targeted intervention within the general education classroom. And I wanted to highlight that because we're really focusing on not pulling our students out of the classroom with their primary teacher. We want to be able to build the capacity of our classroom teachers to be able to provide support for our students who need that extra little support to be able to get them over the edge. And so we want to keep them in the classroom and provide that Tier 2 targeted intervention for our students. Another thing that I want to highlight with our response to the data that we've seen, Eric, if you can go down to the next page. Of course, there's some things that I can talk about around culturally sustaining pedagogy or culturally relevant pedagogy, but I'll talk a little bit about that under our professional learning. But I really want to thank our community organizations. And so we want to continue to partner with our community organizations such as United Way, YSS, Raising Readers, Ames Public Library, Boys and Girls Club, and Iowa State University, just to name a few, to be able to help, to continue to help support our elementary students, focusing in on reading and then including aspects of STEM. And so if you notice on that first page, one of the response was about extending school time. And so instead of like putting that weight on our students and our families. We want to use the current system that we have in place, such as, if I can use an example, a Boys and Girls Club, and connecting some of the strategies that we're already using in class and bringing our Boys and Girls Club team in to be able to provide that continual reading intervention as students transition to the club. And so that's an example that I want to be able to share with you with that. Also being able to meet with United Way and YSS and Ames Public Library, raising readers to be able to partner to make sure there's some consistency in identification with summer school program. And so that's extending the year for these learners that we're seeing who are struggling right now. And so those are some things that we already have in place, but we really want to beef it up and bring some consistency across the board. I also want to say, one of the things that we haven't done when you think in terms of being creative and responding to what the data is currently telling us, is that in terms of our Spanish-speaking families, being able to provide assessment in our family's preferred language. And so, we have students who are learning English, but we are assessing them in English, right? But their primary language is Spanish. So we want to be able to assess them in their primary language to be able to see what they know, right? Because sometimes it's difficult to be able to share what you know in another language. So we want to be able to provide some assessments in the primary language of some of our students. And so I wanted to highlight that, and that's a way for us to do that. And it would take for us to be very intentional about recruiting multilingual teachers. And so if we've had conversations in the past and we've talked about increasing our staff diversity, and that's one of the areas that I really want us to begin to focus on, is increasing recruiting multilingual teachers to be able to help support that. And lastly, I want to say for our professional learning, we're going to continue to focus on critical consciousness. We know we can't get to our teachers, but there are some things that we put in place to be able to get that learning to our teachers, and we want to continue to be creative in providing that learning, not only for our teachers, but also for our families. We'll be sending out some professional learning series for critical consciousness with our families this semester that I'm pretty excited about. Also, I wanted to say too, in terms of creating that sense of belonging for our families, we will be presenting and joining the National Black Lives Movement Week of Action at the beginning of February. So we will be providing some resources for our teachers to be able to provide for our students during the first week in February. So I'm pretty excited to get that going. What questions do you have in a minute and 30 seconds?
I'll just send you an email.
All right.
Looks good.
Please invite me back, because I want more time with the board to be able to share and get feedback from you with the work that we're doing across the district, and specifically through our equity and equity initiative.
Dr. Jones, I appreciate the information. I think I will speak for myself that you're not getting questions from me because my wheels are spinning on what I should be asking. So I would welcome the opportunity for you to come back so we can learn about the things that you're doing. What I'm reading is very intriguing, and I was, in any way that we can celebrate the National Black Lives Matters in schools for that first week of February at the board level, let us know. So I will speak, that's on behalf of me. I don't want to speak on behalf of the board, but thank you for the information.
Thank you. Please invite me back.
Yes, I agree with that. And I hope that we can have you come back, because I also have too many questions to ask in a minute. So I will write them down and we will have you come back another time.
Awesome. Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. I appreciate it. And also, I appreciate the work that Erin Meek did in helping get the data and the presentation together. So we are very fortunate to have her as well. Thank you. Okay, I'm turning it over to you, Director Shields-Cook.
That's me. All right. Well, it looks like I think we have hit the end of our discussion items, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move
I
we
move
adjourn.
we,
I move we adjourn.
second.
Okay, moved by Bankin, seconded by Perez. And just before I do a call, just for the community, we will move right into, will we move right into, or do we need a 3-minute break?
I could use a quick break if we can.
I could too. I'm gonna need to log in on a different computer.
Okay, so we will adjourn this meeting and have a quick 3-minute break, and then move into our next meeting. So all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Okay, passes 7-0.
Do we stay on this link? We don't have to log out and get into the link on our other agenda, do we?
You stay on this one, yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Do we have everyone? I think maybe we're still waiting for Alan. There's Alan. All right, Eric, are we good to go?
Yep.
Everything's still running, right?
We're
Okay.
good.
Okay, perfect. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular board meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors for January 11th. I will call the meeting to order and entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, moved by Perez, seconded by Colton. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. And Director Lankaitis, will you please read our purpose statement?
Ames Community School District commits to equity and access that empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential.
Thank you. All right, and our first item on the agenda tonight is our COVID-19 update. So Superintendent Reisner and Dr. Arnold, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Dr. Arnold has prepared the local conditions.
Yes, and thank you for pulling that up, Eric. Here tonight to provide our update on COVID status in our building and our local and school metrics. So the first page that you see in front of you shows our COVID positives and quarantines in our schools. Today, we have 11 students positive for COVID-19 and 35 quarantining due to being identified as a close contact. From the staff side, there are 5 positive for COVID-19 and 3 quarantining due to being identified as close contacts. And we have 2 staff pending test results. The graphs below this table show that change in positives and quarantines since October. The left graph shows positives, the right shows quarantines, and students are in orange, staff are in gray. I don't expect that you're able to identify specific numbers based upon this, but more looking at the pattern overall. We can go ahead and scroll down to our community metric next. So this next page is our community metric. Our 14-day average new daily case rate is 34.1 as of when I put this report together. This represents a slight increase from our December 29th special school board meeting. I'm continuing to closely watch the numbers to see if this is the beginning of another spike from holiday travel and gatherings, but with that said, we are almost 2 weeks past the holidays and so far have not seen a dramatic increase in cases yet. Additionally, the data from the free asymptomatic testing event at ISU last Friday does not appear to be in the state's database yet. And I will continue to monitor our numbers in the situation based upon those updates. Below the table, you'll see the case rates. The left one is the case rate over the past month, and the right one shows the case rate throughout our school year. The yellow, orange, and red lines represent the bottom of that particular risk level from our metrics. The black line represents the level at which our community indicator overrides our school metrics, and we are well below that right now. Moving on to our school metrics on the following page. As of today, we have our 5-day student absence rates for starting here in 2021. For high school, it's 2.51%, middle school 1.23%, and PK through 5 combined at 1.64%. That keeps us in our green risk band for all levels of our student absence rate. The staff absence rate is also shown there. A high school at 5.82%, middle school at 4.14%, and elementary at 3.76. The high school is just pushed into that yellow risk band, and our middle and elementary schools remain in the green band. And the charts below show students on the left and staff on the right, that progression of our absence rate for over the past month. And again, yellow, orange, and red lines representing the bottom of that particular risk level from our metrics. You will see a break in the data line that is the winter break that occurred. So that's why there is a space in that line. And I also wanted to provide an update on two more items related to COVID. First, I've been asked frequently why we are not doing surveillance testing at our schools, why we're not doing testing of students and staff. As people may have seen, some schools in other states are doing students and staff testing that is generated by the schools. In Iowa, that's not something that is logistically possible. And I did check again today with IDPH and received confirmation that currently in Iowa, testing needs to be ordered by a physician or through an approved clinic and not through the school. So at this point, that is not something that we can offer. Again, things can change over time, but that's just the status as of now. The second piece is regarding vaccinations. Currently, school staff are considered to be part of Iowa's phase 1B for vaccinations. However, we don't have a date for when that phase will start. Our most recent report is locally they believe to be they will be completed with phase 1A by mid-February. And then the beginning date for phase 1B is determined by the IDPH and a committee called the IDAC, which is a subcommittee specifically working on the vaccine rollout. Again, all of this is subject to change with upcoming change with administration in Washington, D.C. on January 20th. But as far as our vaccinations, I have been in contact with public health, talked through our ideas and plans and how we could accomplish that. However, at this point, we can't move forward with anything until we do have a date. And we will be contacted by Story County Public Health once they have a better idea of when that is going to occur. So this ends my update. What questions can I answer?
The numbers you had for students quarantined due to close contact, do you know or have a feel for how many of those quarantined due to close contact are due to being in the school environment?
As to the best of my knowledge, 0 of those are from within our schools. We do have some that are close contact quarantines related to an exposure at a daycare, not through ACSD, but through a daycare that has had a quarantine case or a positive COVID case.
Dr. Arnold, I don't know if you know the answer to this, because I don't know if this is on your radar to be watching, but are we seeing, in comparison of our average, our attendance average from a year ago compared to now, in terms of other illnesses not being as apparent, given that we are wearing masks at school?
I will say, from talking to other people in the community, as well as in Iowa, that has been, that's why they believe our flu incidence is possibly lower than we have seen due to mask wearing. As far as a comparison of illness, I don't have a specific, where we were last year. I did look at the 1 week period of this week versus last year, the same week. Gosh, that's hard to say. Anyway, I did look at a comparison there, and our, don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but our elementary school was very similar to where we were within, a small amount. And our current absence rate for the middle school and high school was a bit higher. Is a bit higher now than what we saw last year at the same time, but nothing in a huge market level.
Okay.
Dr. Arnold, is there any update on vaccine availability for staff?
Nope. We don't have a date. I know that IDAC met today, and they'll disseminate that information to the local public health. I believe they have a meeting on Tuesdays. But as of right now, what we've heard from public health is perhaps mid-February. I do know that other counties have put out preliminary plans or schedules, but at this point, that is not something that we have for Story County. You know, the earliest I've heard is that mid-February timeline. But again, if the administration changes and changes the practice of holding vaccines back, that could change the schedule, but that's all to be seen on how that will happen.
Thank you, Dr. Arnold. We will move to the next, and that's going to be Dr. Hawkins, and this is just our remote campus learning numbers.
Thank you for pulling those up. Okay, so board, I'm taking the place here of Christy Mixdorf, but I'm happy to go through this report with you. You can see that as of January 4th, our remote campus numbers at our elementary level have remained relatively consistent. Our numbers at the middle school and high school are slightly increasing, the largest increase at the high school. That's what that top box shows as far as overall enrollment. The box in the middle really tries to capture how many students are in hybrid wanting to go to remote, right? That's captured by that 49 students that would have made that request as of January 4th. You can see then the students that were in remote requesting to go to hybrid or to some version of face-to-face. There were 41 in the PK5 part of our system. There are 59 that requested that for the secondary part of the system. The reason those are separated is because those secondary students haven't necessarily been moved yet, but will be doing so as this next semester begins. Those 41 students would have made that move when we returned from winter break. And then if you want to scroll, thank you so much. That just explains what I just explained. And then the last box really is a comparative model to other UEN districts as far as class size. And again, you'll see that we compare very favorably with class sizes, particularly in our elementary remote campus setting. Are there, I hesitate to ask because I don't have a lot of depth here, but are there any questions from the board about this information?
I have a question, Dr. Hawkins, and if you can't answer it, that's fair. How's that? So I see the 41 PK5. So presumably those are individuals that moved by January 4th. So they came back into our elementary, which was, we opened in the full face-to-face. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Okay. So then a question I have for you, related question to what I asked our middle school and high school principals. As we are looking at the shift third quarter, so our new change dates, third quarter and fourth quarter, as more students potentially come in, what is your plan for how monitoring, is there a plan, and maybe you do or do not, maybe this is Director Mixdorf, in terms of monitoring those in-school class sizes, in terms of how that may impact them, that movement?
Sure. Yeah, there most definitely is a plan. I can speak to this on a surface level. I would agree with you. Director Mixdorf would be able to speak in more depth, but there's most definitely a plan in which class size enrollment is being monitored really, honestly, on a day-to-day basis, particularly as we get closer to those deadlines where transition might occur. But even when we're not close to those deadlines, we have students and families moving into the district all the time. And so thinking about whether it's move-ins, open enrollment requests ins, or potential timeframes of changes, we're watching class sizes closely. Of course, our desire as a system is to keep students at all possible in their neighborhood school system, right? That's always our desire. Of course, one of the strategies, am I addressing what you were even asking?
No, you're spot on.
Okay.
So keep going.
One of the strategies that we're using in order to try to ensure that students can remain in that home boundary area. If they want to go from remote campus to in-person in class, is we're really thinking carefully when we do get a open enrollment request to move into the district. Those might be the ones where we're placing based upon the math of space and availability rather than based on a home setting area. I think that aligns with our past practice as well. And then of course we do have the option. We felt really good that the last time we gave an option, we could accommodate everybody's needs without having to make any staffing changes. There is of course always the option to add an additional staff member that currently teaches on remote campus back to a school setting, or vice versa if the numbers dictate it. But we've felt fortunate that we didn't have to make major changes like that, both for the staff member as well as for all the students that they're serving. So, but if numbers dictate that we need to do that, that's something we're prepared to do as well. So there's a pretty careful monitoring of those numbers.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, because I know you, I'm assuming you all and your team were working through the dates in terms of when folks can change. And I had some families who are out for high risk reasons saying, well, but fourth quarter. And so then I just wondered, then my wheels got thinking, okay, how are you all? Because I'm assuming you're thinking through it, but how you all are thinking through it. So
we are, and we've had those same conversations too, that maybe, everybody's kind of crossing their fingers that by fourth quarter, there's enough vaccination going on that maybe people will feel safe and return. As you probably could infer from the conversation with our middle school and high school principals today, their model is really built to be able to easily absorb students in and out once they get that structure set up. It didn't come up in the work session, but quite frankly, it will be the move between hybrid and full-time that would be a challenge there. And who knows, maybe our governor will solve that one for us. But no, there's definitely a careful monitoring of those. And we also hope the same thing you just alluded to, that our community feels safe to return at that fourth quarter time.
Awesome. Thank you. You answered my questions very well, Dr. Hawkins. So thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
I have kind of a follow-up question to that. And I know it's been asked before, but as we're getting closer to a point where it might be more possible that we would see remote students lose their teacher back to the classroom, could you speak to like what kind of timeline that might be on, or what kind of notification families might get that would be happening?
I can loosely, right? Because again, Director Mixdorf monitors these numbers closer than I do. So I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb. I'll be transparent that I'm going out on that limb. I believe we've only seen enough fluctuation in those numbers that could possibly call for a teacher to be changing their assignments during those transition periods that we offer. In other words, it hasn't really come up from a move-in situation or an open enrollment situation. So when we know what those dates of transition are, and we carefully monitor and have those deadlines for when people need to sign up, then we can also anticipate the time frame in which we can communicate with principals, teachers, and families about any potential changes. Again, we felt very fortunate that we have been able, it's just been a really nice situation that we've been able to provide the level of flexibility to our community that we've promised, and that we've been able to uphold without having to have that be very jarring on our teaching staff or teachers that they've gotten used to. Of course, we always run that risk when we increase flexibility that we're going to have to make those changes, but we've been very fortunate not to have to make them up to this point.
That makes sense. So on those transition periods, and it's typically, there's like a few days between when the deadline is and when the change would happen. So the families would have that few days notification. Okay. Because it's likely to happen in those transition periods, as a system, we're really only going to have a couple of days. And unless for some reason people overwhelmingly sign up, and we can see that in the numbers as the transition period begins. But yes, there's the potential that it could be just a couple of days of notice. Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. The next item is the COVID expenditures, and I think we have good news on this.
So yes, I attached, good evening board, attached is the report that I've been doing every month regarding COVID expenditures. But what I really wanted to talk to you a little bit about tonight is the information we received today on the new federal relief package that was passed at the federal level at the end of the year. We got guidance from the DE today, as well as our allocations. And we're going to get about 5 times what we received in the spring for the COVID relief. So we originally got 370,000, of which about 10,000 belonged to the non-public schools. We got an additional 49,000, of which 2,000 or 3,000 belonged to the non-public schools. So with that money, for the most part, we paid for our distance learning platforms, our 2 new nurses, our COVID coordinator, and some nursing supplies. With the new allocation, we are going to get just under $1.7 million. So I will be working on recoding all of the expenditures that you see on this report to the current or the COVID money that we got in the spring, and any remaining to the new, they call it ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. So I will use up all of the ESSER 1 money based on what we've spent already, and we'll start in on ESSER 2. With what we've obligated for the positions, that would leave us for the rest of the ESSER 2 money of just under 1.5 million to be able to do programs, continue positions. One of the things in the COVID relief is trying to concentrate on programs that will bring students back to where they might have been had we not been in COVID. And we do have until September of 2023 to spend that money. So it's not that we have to get that all spent by the end of this year. So by doing that, we're going to be made whole on all of our COVID expenditures. We won't be at the mercy of the School Budget Review Committee for granting us spending authority, which was getting to look less and less likely because that was going to be a property tax increase. So that was pretty good news. Those are still pretty rough numbers. I was working on it today. I started working on getting code set up, and I'm going to get everything moved over, but I'm pretty confident that that's where we're going to be. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I do think that they did talk about that this was kind of a down payment on the relief, and that they wanted to do a larger relief package after the first of the year. So I would not be at all surprised if there won't be additional money coming as well. I should say the state, they had to give out 90% of the funds to the districts that was allocated to local school districts, and that's what our state did. They gave us 90% of it.
This is excellent news. I think Superintendent Reisner read my mind when she said good news. I was like, is there good news? So good, excellent. So hypothetically speaking, in the work session, we were talking about perhaps hypothetically summer school or extended hours. That would be something that we could use that money towards.
I think Director Colton read my mind. Exactly. Yes. Yes. So, yes, we had a lengthy conversation today, and that is certainly something that we are prepared to move forward and have a really strong model this summer.
Wonderful. Thank you. This is really good news.
I probably should add that I'll be recoding everything that's in fiscal year 21. So the $19,000 we spent in fiscal year 20, I can't do anything about that. So I'll be recoding everything from fiscal year 21.
Do we know what the state's doing with the other 10% of the money that was meant to be allocated to us?
Well, they were able to reserve it, but there were some that could be reserved for administration of the program. We have a Zoom meeting with the DE on Thursday morning. I'm hoping we're going to learn more then. other than telling us that we could go back to March of 2020 and recoup any expenses, which once you're past a fiscal year, that's, you know, it's impractical to say you can go all the way back to March. So really it was from July 1st for us. And that we had until September of 2023 to spend it. And that ESSER 1 had to be spent first before you could access ESSER 2. That's why I'm going to work at journal entering and get all of the expenditures we've done this year already against the ESSER 1 funds and basically get that wiped off the books as far as the state's books are concerned. And then we'll be able to access ESSER 2. So things, for instance, the 2 new nurses and the COVID coordinator that we hired, those were under ESSER 1, but I will get everything moved by journal entry today. Tomorrow and Wednesday. We will actually, starting in January, start their payroll out of the ESSER 2 funds because I'll have ESSER 1 expended.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to hearing more about that. I mean, I know we've seen some of the survey data.
Yeah, I'll revamp this report quite a bit in the future just to show the different, because we also not only have ESSER 1, we have ESSER 2, but we also have the GEAR funds, which is the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funds that we're using for the hotspots. So I'm going to concentrate this report on now on the federal funds as opposed to how much, you know, district expenditures we were making out of our normal budget.
Great. I'd encourage the district to look to it, anything we can do in the near term to help with some of the things we're seeing too. You know, the one that jumps out at me always is the mental health needs we have for all the students. I mean, that came through in all the surveys, it's come through in all the comments. Anything we can do sooner rather than later, now that we know we're going to have funds that could support it, would be much appreciated and something I would fully support in any budgetary actions that came forward.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. All right. And then the final one, we kind of alluded to it a little bit tonight already, but there's a statewide push, which I'm sure you've all heard about through your channels, for the potential of bringing all students back face to face. So the superintendents have been told to prepare for that. We don't know whether or not, you know, that will go through, but we are preparing for that. And the governor is holding a state of the state tomorrow's Tuesday. Yep, tomorrow night. And so, you know, I'm sure that there'll be a little bit of discussion around that tomorrow night as well. And hopefully our superintendent channels will pick up some additional information from the lobbyists. So we will keep you informed on that, but I'm sure you will also get information through IASB as well. So that I just wanted to bring that to your attention, just so you were aware.
Superintendent Reisner, as far as you know, remote campus will remain for those families who choose that, correct?
Yes, absolutely. The remote campus that will remain. And so families who do not feel comfortable returning face to face will also have that option to continue through this year.
There's another big change coming in about 8 days. Have we heard anything, Kathy, on whether, like, say the CDC, for example, might start going back to doing things based on science and have recommendations that are more clear? Because that's going to time out about the same time.
We can always hope. But I do think we will, you know, to be honest, I do think we will start to see some changes. I just don't know how quickly and what that general impact would be. We'll see January 20th, January 21st, and start see how that rolls down to us.
All right. Are there any other questions on the COVID-19 update? Okay, we'll move on to discussion items. And actually, Eric, would you pull up our statement on the public forum? Because before we start the discussion items, I will go ahead and read our statement on public comments. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff members may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on the current agenda or not. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speaker participation is limited to 3 minutes once per item. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board do not necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. Speakers are to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees, students, or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. And so after each of our discussion items, there will be an opportunity for public comment on that specific discussion item. And then our public forum will follow our discussion items. So our first discussion item is our board committee update. And I don't know that, are there any committees that have an update to provide? I know we have a couple meeting this week, equity and policy meet this week. I can't quite.
I believe does facilities meet this week also?
Eric, can you scroll down a little bit?
Facilities is tomorrow.
There we go. Yep, and facilities. Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
so we'll have lots of updates next time. Okay, anything else under board committee update? All right, we will move on to Pebble Budget. And Jerry Peters will give us an update on this.
Thank you, Director. I'm going to give a discussion item, a report on the physical plant and equipment levy fund. I'll give a little bit of background just to establish the table here. And then I do an annual report, which consists of 3 individual year reports, one for last year, one for this year, one for next, a 5-year budget. And then I went ahead and expanded some of the detail just to illustrate what is all included in this process. So the physical plant and equipment levy, otherwise known as PEPL, PPEL, is defined in Iowa Code Chapter 98, Financial Management of Categorical Funding. The PEPL consists of 2 portions of the funding. There's a regular PEPL up to 33 cents and a voter-approved PEPL up to $1.34 for a total levy of $1.67 per $1,000 assessed valuation of property. The last vote to extend $1.34 was in 2018, and that has a 10-year renewal period. The sources of the revenue are primarily from property tax. There's also some interest that's allowed and sale of property and proceeds from loans. If you're interested in the exact details, I'm not reciting the actual code, but just trying to give a rough idea of what it is. So you're welcome to look at the code to find the details in it. Appropriate uses for PEPL funds include purchase of and improvements for grounds, construction of buildings and roads to buildings, equipment or technology, and that has some guidelines in the code. Debt service, repair and reconstruction of existing structures and buildings, energy conservation products or projects, rental of facilities, purchase of transportation equipment, asbestos projects, and demolition of district-owned buildings. There are also defined in the code inappropriate uses of PEPL funding, and inappropriate uses are things like salaries, benefits, supplies, printing costs, costs that are primarily in the general fund. And maintenance also has a specific definition, and maintenance work is not allowed in PEPL funding. And like I said, if you're more interested, I encourage you to look at the PEPL. It's a couple short sections in the Iowa Code. So as we look at the first report, I'll go ahead and go into the reports now, Eric. The first one is the results of last year. And I use this report to identify certain budget accounts, do a line item tracking. If we look at the bottom line, the total expenditures is under the paid to date, which is through the end of the fiscal year, is just roughly 3.2 million. And below that, total revenue is just over 5 million. So the significant thing, the important thing is to watch the bottom line. And then there is some pluses and minuses, adds and deducts then as we go through. So the next thing that I work hard to pay attention on is the remaining amount. And that tracks the difference between the budget and the amount spent. And if you notice, there are quite a few red line items that show an over budget expenditure. I can explain each one of these, but primarily the reason for that is what I call the fiscal year straddle. So I have this money that's allocated on a fiscal year basis, but I have time during the summer to be able to execute these projects. The fiscal year ends on June 30th. And so the projects will occur primarily in June and July and hopefully not taper too far into August. So it's difficult, it's challenging to be able to predict that straddle in which time the work gets done and the invoicing gets done within that fiscal year. So I do work to be able to try and manage that as we move forward into next year's budget and the following year budget to be able to predict those. Like I said, I do track and I look at those specifically to make sure that I understand that the costs are being charged to the right account and that they are accurate. So for instance, we've got a little bit overage on busing as we kind of move down to, I like to look at the bigger numbers. There's a special construction athletics code number in there for $61,000. The tennis court final payment occurred in July of 2019. So this is the 19-20 fiscal year. So that's one of the contributors. Plus we had some invoicing for press box stairs that were planned in the following year that were actually invoiced in June of 2020. Moving on down, equipment, furniture, and furnishings. That was projects that occurred late in 2019 that were budgeted that year that got overage. Those projects had to do with the elementary gym audiovisual improvements, as well as putting motors on the bleachers. And then technology is one that's commonly unpredictable because of when that invoice actually hits. We do show under maintenance equipment a $30,000 overage. But as I look at that, I work the district vehicles and maintenance equipment kind of as a combined. So the net difference between those is actually a $70,000 savings. I also carry each year a $300,000 contingency fund. It provides just a little bit of a cushion in the budget. One thing that's unique about the Pebble funding then also is that we can have a fund balance and we can carry that forward into the future. And that's important, and I need to keep track of that as it goes into the future, because in order to be able to do replace systems on buildings, I need to be able to kind of bank some money for when we get into pretty big or significant or multiple projects. For instance, in 22 years after the elementaries were built, we need to replace the roofs. So I have those planned and budgeted starting in would be 2036 for the first building. And so if we're doing 2 buildings there, that accumulates into $500,000 to $1 million on that budget. So I want to be able to utilize that fund balance to be able to anticipate that. The next sheet is the final for this year, the final budget. So I do an initial budget, which is identifying the detailed line items. And then prior to this fiscal year, then I finalize that budget. So I lock that in. So that's the budget that I'm going to go with. And as much as I can anticipate or make adjustments for that fiscal year straddle, then I can get closer to that. And then I will monitor and track this budget and the expenditures on a regular basis and report to the facilities committee. Nothing too exciting with that one. There's a couple of red bars. All of them are understandable and explainable. The next one then, I prepare next year's budget is the 21-22 initial budget. And this was a process that we set up some time ago as part of the Pebble committee. And so I'm just continuing with this process. So again, not too much here that's exciting. The next budget is the 5-year plan. So this takes and summarizes these budgets on a line-by-line basis and compares that with each other on for the next upcoming 5 years. A couple of things with this report or that have developed in coordination with the facilities committee is we had some money budgeted in the Pebble for the high school project. And we needed to do that because at the time we were wanting to provide some funding for the high school, we didn't have the sales tax extension. So in order to be able to make sure that we were developing a plan that was realistic and that we could actually back, we put the funding in the Pebble. Once the SAVE was passed, then we didn't need to have the Pebble fund because now we have the SAVE funds that we'll be able to use to fund the high school. And so those are some things that went out. So that again helps to be able to support that fund balance so we can take into the future to be able to do improvements or to be able to purchase buildings or lands or build things and so on. So it's given us ability to be able to manage our funding in such a way that we can not necessarily have to go out and seek another bond. So that's what's kind of helpful. Let's see. So then the next sheets is digging into, and I'm opening up the box of this budget that I take care of. So the next sheet shows all the line items that are accounted up for regular repairs, routine repairs. And this page is how I account for this. I look at being able to account for individual repairs on a building by building basis. There's specific things that we do. I'll work to be able to combine them into a project, even though they occur at each building. But I also do track these on a building basis so I can see how the building costs are accumulating over time. The next sheet then is the breakdown, shows the other 6 categories. I've broken the whole budget into 7 groups or categories. The first one is the routine repairs that I showed. The second one is the technology. So I work with Director Hopper, the Director of Technology, to be able to get the budgets and be able to plan for the one-to-one refresh and district technology expenditures. So I enjoyed working with him, and we're doing a lot of good things to be able to plan and prepare for that. Category 3 is bus leasing. The next one is vehicles and equipment. And then the next category is rental. And the last one is, well, not the last one, but the second to last is capital improvements. And that's a lot of that work ends up occurring over the summer, as well as some of the routine repairs that I have to accomplish. And then finally, I have a contingency, and I'm showing that in there. So if we go into the next sheet, then I've streamlined down to focus in on, these are the capital projects. So this is just a repeat of that section that was shown previously. And then I have a budget summary and then a graphical pie chart just to be able to illustrate the portions of each of those categories or groups that we fund through Pebble. And then the next one, as we kind of travel on down to the funnel into less and less detail, is the 2020 or the 21-22 budget. And so kind of as we look at that, my goal is to be able to accomplish the projects that I haven't finished last year that are budgeted in 2021, as well as the ones that are scheduled for 21-22, or else if something gets pushed up, then that's going to go into the next summer. And the last sheet then is just the summary of the next 3 years in total on that. So when we work with the principals who operate their buildings, we have a certain criteria for considering the eligibility of Pebble requests or Pebble projects. And then it starts out with safety, ADA, repair or remodel, capital improvements, energy recovery, renewal and replacement, or reserves. And so those are the criteria that we use and be able to work to be able to get the requests. I'll process the requests through the facilities committee and then put them in the budget, and then we'll see them the next time I come around. So speaking of timing, I'd like to be able to get this report to time closer to or be in alignment with the Chris Stenslet's budget. So I'm a little bit behind this year, and I apologize for that, but things keep moving. Are there any questions?
I just had a quick question. You said that you're able to, with this fund, to move money forward. You don't have to spend it all each fiscal year. Is there a percentage or an amount that you're permitted to keep within it? Do they base it on the percentage spent or anything like that?
Not that I know of. I can, if Chris knows the answer to that, she's my go-to person for those. but I don't know that there's any limit.
I'm going to apologize. Someone sent me a text message and I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat it?
Wow, full disclosure.
It was work related.
I just asked if there was a limit on how much you could carry forward from year to year in the Pebble Fund.
No, the Pebble is its own fund. So it's not, so whatever we receive stays in that fund against whatever expended. So no, there's no limit. The only limitation on any funds being carried over is in the general fund, where we're limited to 20% of our expenditures in fund balance in a year. And the only limitation then is if we have 20% or more in fund balance of our expenditures, we can't levy cash reserve levy.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if there's no
So
other
it looks, Jerry, so it looks like you're trying to basically accumulate like about 350,000 or more per year to kind of save up, get more of a reserve. Is there any specific reason for that? Is that generally just to make sure you have the budget for those longer term items you were talking about?
So not that deliberate. Once I accumulate, I'd like to keep at least 2 million in that fund balance. And once I've accumulated that, then I just want to strategically plan the projects in a sequential order that we can accomplish in order of need and priority.
And it looks like right now, based on this budget, you're going to be maintaining what, between $7 and $8.5 million?
That's what it looks like now. There are things that come up in that process. So it's kind of like predicting weather. You know, when I look at the 10-day forecast, weather 8 days out, I'm kind of like watching it. But as I get closer, I take it more serious. So and what I'm saying is that we get closer, then I'm able to get the things funded in there that are going to come up. So things come up sometimes quicker than what we'd like. One example would be the partitions that we put in to divide 3 of the classrooms at the middle school last summer. So that was something that came up in the spring, but that was a need. It hit several of the criteria. So we needed to get that.
Mm-hmm.
So to have that cushion in there to be able to respond on some of those things is very helpful.
Yeah, no, I like having the cushion there. I would compliment you on that because that allows us to, like, when we did run into that issue like a year and a half ago with the high school budget and things like that, we do have a reserve. And I have seen the way you predict weather. And just so people know, it's about as detailed as this, the way Jerry looks at when he's going to have people out shoveling the walks and everything. Nothing simple.
Another thing to keep in mind about the fund balance for Pebble, depending on what projects are happening over the summer and the size of those, Pebble revenue comes in basically in October and April. So if you don't have a fund balance and you have a large project happening, you're not going to have ongoing revenue to pay for that at the time the project's happening.
So you need to have a bigger reserve for cash flow purposes then probably.
Depending on what the projects are. Maybe not 7 million, but yeah.
No, that's good.
Good. Any other questions? All right, if there are no other questions, then the plan is to be able to bring the budget, if there's any input or tweaks that I might have with the facilities committee meeting, but I'll bring it to the school board for approval next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Need that. All right, the next discussion, I'm sorry. Are there any public comments related to the Pebble budget discussion item? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So we will move on to the return to in-person board meetings discussion item. And this was just something that has been brought up a few times, and I just wanted the board to have an opportunity to discuss it all together and maybe come to some consensus or just kind of share thoughts right now, and we can look at coming to consensus in the future. I did want to say one thing before anyone else shares their thoughts that just to avoid anybody having to disclose information that they may not want to disclose, that we do have board members who have high-risk medical conditions and who currently receive accommodations for those through their workplaces. And so I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. I don't want anybody to feel like they have to disclose personal information, but we do need to be aware that those people, we need to keep everybody's needs in our mind as we're having this conversation. So I'd be interested to hear anyone's thoughts about a possible return to in-person board meetings.
I would actually support a return to in-person board meetings. I would also support whatever modification or waiver of the rules that require in-person attendance for board members. I would support in any way continuing the way in which we've extended the meetings to the community through the virtual means. Because what I wouldn't want to happen is then be sitting in a room full of 60 people or whatever it is, right? So I think the way that we can do this that is safe given the circumstances, I would be in favor of.
My thought, I was thinking about this. Personally, I am fine with personally going and doing in person, but I would probably be supportive of continuing with online, simply because I don't want it to be felt that we are pressuring anyone, be it board members or staff that supports these board meetings, to have to be in person. And I don't want to put anybody at a disadvantaged situation relative to other board members because of that. I don't feel that's something that we should make board members and staff members have to make that choice when we've already proven this method works. But that said, I'll support whatever the majority feels here, and yeah, that's currently where I think I am.
I support with staying online for now, just because we have achieved a cohesiveness in the meetings, and I don't want to make anyone have to attend a meeting. So I would go with what the majority said, just like Director Beerbaum was saying. But for now, I'm okay with remaining online.
I am landing close to where Dr. Bankin is landing. For me, the reason, so number one, is there a way we can mirror what we do to what we're having as expectations for our staff as we're looking at full face-to-face? So first and foremost, obviously, for me, making those accommodations for whether it's staff or board members that need those, fully support those. I am very willing to be in an in-person setting. Clearly, I have the privilege of not having any medical reasons to not, but for me, I struggle with not being doing an in-person meeting should we walk down the path of the expectation, or if we walk down the path of doing the full face-to-face for our secondary education students. We've started with our elementary education students this week, and so I guess or last week, and so that's where I am falling with it. So, but certainly I'm with, I think a couple people have said it, but the ways that we have been able to reach the public have been great. And I would like us to continue this beyond this year because our reach to our community, I watch the participant numbers so I can see how many people we are touching. So I certainly would like to have that included in whatever path we take.
I agree.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Gina. I was going to say I agree with Director Beerbaum and Director Colton that I think the online meetings have been very effective, not only for board members, but for the public. If we have board members who can't fully participate in person, it does put them at a disadvantage if the rest of us are in a meeting. But on a bigger, I'm kind of a process person, so I'd be very interested to understand if we are returning, if that's the decision that's made tonight, what is that going to look like for us, for staff that has to be at the meetings, and for the public having access to the meetings. And if there's board members who can't be at the meetings, what will that look like for them? I don't think I can make a decision either way without having more information.
You kind of took the words out of my mouth. I think without knowing what it would look like if the people who need accommodations, if they're not able to participate as much because they're not physically in the room, that could be a huge concern. I mean, it doesn't seem fair if it's not something where everybody can participate equally. Plus, there's also some liability there if we have 53 people in the audience and they're sitting packed in. There could be issues from that as well. So I think a lot more would have to be thought out and planned out to make it so that it's fair for everybody.
You just mentioned something, Director Perez, that sparked something in my mind. Superintendent Reisner, I don't know if you, maybe Chris, if you know, is it possible to have in-person meetings and either limit or not allow members of the community be in the room, but they could be on the screen? Like, can you limit the number, or can you limit the, but still provide it, you know, through the means that we have provided since last March? Do you know?
I'd have to go back and look at the governor's proclamation. I think it was addressed in there as far as limiting. I think you still had to provide the physical space if you were in person for people. So I mean, I think you could limit so much to the boardroom and so much in conference room A and so much in conference room B and so forth, is if I remember it right. And Superintendent Reisner, maybe you can help me if you remember.
Yeah, I think you can. I actually think you can limit it. I would need to also go back and read that. But I don't know that we've, I hate to say it, but I don't know that we've, since I've been here, there hasn't been many times where I think we've filled the boardroom, but you can't probably go on that.
Then the question would be, you know, who do you let in and who you don't, because that's going to be touchy.
Yeah, I do remember but rather than us guess, we can find that answer out and bring that back to the board. The other piece to that, just knowing that this has been a discussion in the previous months, we did go ahead and get the answers that the board had asked early on. And I think that was, those questions were, can we still have like a virtual platform such as Zoom, like we have been doing, to allow the community participation that we have had? And the answer to that is yes. And then the answer to the configuration of the boardroom, we were able to work that out, and I will let Stephen or Eric talk about the configuration of the board, just so you have that information, because I know that I heard several of you ask, you needed those details. And in the meantime, we could try to get an answer tonight before the end of the board meeting, because I know it's a timely decision regarding the limiting of public. So Chris, would you mind making a call to Drew on that? I'm looking for your face. I don't see your face. Did you shake your head? Yes. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I was on the Corona site to see if I could find it in the proclamation.
Yeah, I was just saying if you could make a quick call to Drew before the end of the night, that way we could
Yep.
have an answer. And then Eric, if you want to speak, if you and Stephen would like to speak to the configuration. I'm not sure if Stephen's on, but
No, Steven's not here, but we initially did some testing last time we talked about it, and we essentially would be having the board members at the board table. We did set up where we have 2 extra tables that extend beyond the board table so that we could spread out a little bit more and have microphones there. Essentially what we would be doing is we would be operating a Zoom meeting and then projecting it into the boardroom. And so the things that we were looking at were essentially how does the video and audio work within that room. And so how we're operating here through Zoom, we would essentially pump that into the school board meeting. And so all of the school board members and anyone who is in attendance live would be able to hear who is on Zoom and vice versa. There will be a little bit of nuance. So typically in the past when we had in-person meetings, anyone who needed to present could go to the board table and plug in and present. Well, now we're using that plug-in component to run the Zoom meeting. So all of the presentation would have to be run how we're doing it now. People wouldn't necessarily be able to go up to the board table and plug in and present, but we also haven't had that need for the past 9 months as well. And we've been able to, so we would be presenting through the Zoom meeting. Last week when we found out it was going to be on the agenda again, we were looking at times to do a run through, and we didn't get another run through in before this meeting, but we have one scheduled for tomorrow where we're going to essentially run it as, okay, the school board meeting's happening at this time and we're going to test it out again, but I have no reason to believe that it wouldn't work. One thing that did come to mind was about the board rooms, the conference rooms. We will be able to get the feed into there. I'm not, without honestly having thought about it, how we would get participation necessarily from within those rooms into the meeting, but I suppose if someone wanted to participate and if we got to the point where we were in an overflow situation, then someone could participate in person within the boardroom as well. But
we talked about, so the board would have the ability to social distance, but as another protective measure, we would wear masks during the meeting.
Was there any, I'm guessing we just can't do it and that's fine. Was there any consideration, Eric, when you and Stephen were looking at it, as whether we could do the configuration like we do during work sessions, where we go to the tables kind of to the side where we're much more spread out potentially?
You can absolutely do that. The difficulty comes with recording it.
The microphones become the problem, right?
The microphones, not as much as the TV cameras.
Okay.
It's just not pointed that way. I don't know without Stephen, Stephen had done some configurations. You could probably put that same configuration or similar to it in the front. It just might cut off a little bit of the sides. Whoever's on the sides might get a little cut off. I'm not positive on that, but I think that would be doable to do it that way. But I think Stephen had done the board configuration, but spaced it, spread it out a bit more.
Yeah, the main thing that we were testing was the audio video. As we do it through Zoom right here, everyone has a microphone and has a camera right in front of them. When we go to live in-person meetings, we need to be able to capture that video of those the board members who are in attendance, and we can only use one camera at a time when we do that.
Is there any echoing?
That was actually one of our biggest concerns, was how we would get feedback with the audio, and it worked. So And we're going to run through it again. We have it on the calendar tomorrow to run through it again. And we're going to set up a Zoom meeting. We're going to broadcast it and test it again. But when we tested it the first time, it worked. So those board members who would be in attendance, they can see who is on, who is being projected, which would be essentially what this Zoom meeting is. So they would see the agenda and then a handful of the thumbnails of the videos up top. And so those, if somebody talks, then we would be able to hear them and engage that way.
So Chris, I don't know if you found anything, but I did, and it looks like that was suspended. So we would not have to allow public in. We just would have to allow a place for public to congregate, or that may have been suspended as well. I'm really reading.
Yeah, the answer I got from Drew, I asked him if we can limit the number of public that can attend, and his answer was only if you can provide remote or online access.
Yeah, that's what this says as well. So if we were providing the Zoom, we would be fine, because we would have, it would be hosted entirely through electronics.
Or he just added, or if we're exceeding the fire marshal's allowed occupancy.
Yeah.
So I guess we've heard from everyone except me. I'm thinking through, the reasons why we would be in person versus online. And it doesn't seem, I don't hear any reasons that really look at our ability to operate effectively. It feels to me like the board's ability to operate effectively is best served in the format that we're using right now, where we all can see each other's faces. Everyone can have an opportunity to talk. We have good public input. We're all kind of on the same grounds in terms of, the opportunity. So we don't have somebody who's at home and maybe isn't able to participate as effectively. I understand that we are asking our staff to be in person, and I hear that as well. And I've shared that concern that if we're asking our staff to be in person, that I think we ought to be in person too. But I also think there's a very good reason that we're asking the staff to be in person, that looks at how schools operate, and their ability to operate effectively is better served in person, as we've heard multiple times throughout this past year. So for me, I am right now leaning on the side of staying in the remote format. So, and I kind of kept track, and it sounded like we had 2 for in-person, 3 who were clearly remote, Alan, Jeanette, Sabrina, and then Gina and Michelle were leaning towards remote, if I heard that correctly.
I would rather do remote, just because we each have our own little cameras right here, and we're not wearing masks. So people that have some hearing impairments may be able to read our lips better. There may be a better communication thing with how we're doing it right now as well.
I think we've been very effective remotely. And so I guess I'd like to understand how we'd be more effective being in person.
So I guess for now, is this something that would come back, just as a procedural question, is this something that we would come back to vote next meeting, since it's a discussion item this meeting? Would that be?
So I don't know.
Do we need a?
Yeah, I don't know if we need a vote, do we?
I don't think we need a vote.
Okay.
You don't need a vote.
Okay, so it sounds like for now we will remain in the remote model for board meetings. Okay. So then, are there any comments from the public on the return to in-person board meetings discussion item? And just as a reminder, if you raise your hand, then we can give you permission to speak. Okay, and I don't see any, so we will go on to return to in-person committee meetings, which I'm assuming folks probably feel the same way. If anyone would like to add something different.
We talked about this, I think, one time in a facilities committee meeting, and in that specific meeting where we involved people from outside the board and the district, we definitely lean toward the idea of staying remote as long as really there's any sort of community concern, because we don't want to require people that we're working with or meeting with from facilities to have to come in person just simply to meet with us. It's also worked out very well because it's made it easy for those same people to come in and out of the meetings as they need. So I think for that specific one, we probably would try to stay in remote as long as is needed for those type of collaborations.
To kind of add to what Dr. Beerbaum is saying, in addition to the people who come from outside of our district to the meetings, it's much more effective for many board members who work during the day, and most of these meetings occur during the day. It saves us from having to drive to the meeting and takes additional time, and it's much more efficient for us to be able to participate in the meetings. And I think they've worked exceptionally well.
That's a really good point. It can take a while to travel to a meeting in person, but also the conference rooms, like was talked about earlier, are not as friendly for an online meeting where you might include remote people. So that was something else I wanted to keep in mind.
I know that I guess I've heard from other people that there is a preference to perhaps keep our committee meetings online, maybe even permanently, because it does work so well, especially for the committees that use a lot of staff time, like the policy committee and the equity committee and all of that. But I guess from my perspective, in terms of the committee meetings, at least, I don't have a preference one way or the other, but I did want to be sure we all had the opportunity to weigh in on it. So I'll do whatever other people think.
I think it was Superintendent Reisner who, I think it was this summer that you made a comment that the committee meetings, the efficiency of it, with what Director Lankaitis indicated, it's just, it works a lot better in managing our volunteer time, especially when everyone has different other responsibilities that they're in charge of during the 8 to 5 window when we likely will hold our committee meetings. So
Yeah, I did talk about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't know what I did. I clicked something and everything's weird, but I'm going to try to go with it the rest of the meeting. But I did, I just for the very reasons you said, I know many of you work and we do these meetings over your lunch hour, and I can't imagine you having to try to get back and forth. Now we take up the whole hour or more. So I think it's a really efficient way, and I think it gives public an opportunity to tune in if they would like as well. So that would be something I would be very much in favor of staying with that model.
I think one thing we could think about if we did that model in some of the committee meetings, which would be a slight departure, but it could be per committee to think about. I've done this on some other committees I've done in other areas. You can then think about having like on-site visits for certain very specific things that are outside the normal minutia of the committee. So, I mean, for facilities, we have an obvious one, right, of we could go see the high school. But teaching and learning, for example, you could have something where maybe you're going to visit with some reading specialist teachers or something to get some feedback, or there's some things we can do there that might get us out of some of the rut that sometimes the committee meetings feel like, where it's just going through an agenda in a small room, trying to get done, trying to get back from lunch, all the things we mentioned. So I would encourage us to maybe use this as a way to think creatively about some other things we could do too.
Yeah, I think they have, meetings have functioned very well remotely, and we can, the public can access those meetings easier. So I will be in support of keeping them remotely.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we will keep in person or keep committee meetings remote as well. All right. Are there any comments from the public on the return to in-person committee meetings? All right, I don't see any, so I will go ahead and open our public forum. And again, as a reminder, if you would like to speak as part of the public forum, you can go ahead and raise your hand and we will go in order and give you permission to speak. Stephanie Hamilton, you have been given permission to speak. And it looks like you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
This is Stephanie Hamilton, 2603 Kingston Drive. I don't know that I have much to say. I think I just have questions, and I'm hoping that maybe there can be more clarity from the district. In listening to the plans for second semester for secondary, so the middle school and the high school, two things. One is I keep hearing that physical distancing will not be as possible. So I would like to know what the plans are, especially for lunch times when masks can't be worn. So I don't know if you can answer those tonight. And then the other question is, having a little trouble putting my head around these 4-day-a-week schedules. That's great if we can stay in person and the positivity rates stay down. I understand that the governor is really pushing for in person, but if positivity rates were really to go up and we were not able to have everyone in school each day, I don't yet understand how these new 4-day-a-week plans could become a hybrid. I guess I can see how they could just switch to online, but would there be an in-between hybrid type stage, or would it just be full online or full in person? So questions, not a lot other to say. Thank you for all of your work. I know it's been a challenging 9 months.
Thank you for those questions, Stephanie. And I thought I had seen another hand raised, but I don't see one now. So if you had raised your hand, please raise it again. Casey Bergeson Cruz, you've been given permission to speak. If you want to go ahead and unmute.
Hi, my name is Casey Bergeson Cruz. We live at 2513 Suncrest Drive in Ames. I have a 7th and 8th grader at Ames Middle School. I am deeply troubled by what I have heard and seen from Ames Community Schools the last 9 months. You are contributing to a lost generation of students by delaying their return to school. Science has shown, not only throughout Story County, across the country and around the world, that children are not spreading this virus in the classroom. I remind you that this virus has a greater than 99% survival rate for adults outside of elderly care facilities. And in the case of children, it is more likely that a child will die from swallowing a toothpick than die from this virus. Families with economic means have been able to make sacrifices and figure out at-home learning, but we have got to ensure that our most vulnerable families are able to do the same. It was great to see the free lunch program continued, but the families that desperately need those free lunches are the ones that do not have the transportation to pick up those lunches. An 11-year-old child shot himself last month on a Zoom class meeting. Suicide rates are skyrocketing, and physical and mental abuse is happening to our children, not only in Ames, Iowa, but throughout the country. We have seen countless studies over the last 10 years on the negative effects of screen time on our children, and now the main method of education is sitting in front of a screen. This group has been saying for months that we need to follow the science. And guess what the science says? The best place for kids is in school. At the board meeting in early December, we listened to the equity board speak about us needing to follow the evidence over and over again. Why does listening to the evidence not only apply when it comes to keeping our kids in school? The precedent that you are setting for future issues that come before you is frankly terrifying and depleting the trust that we as parents have given to you. These last few seconds, I'd like to send a message to all parents listening tonight. There is power in our collective voices. Please speak up and advocate for our children and their futures. Let us come together and stop our children's education, physical and mental health, and social health from being the lowest priorities we hold out for. Please email and call both our school district as well as Governor Reynolds. Ames Community Schools, enough is enough. Stop denying kids their futures because of personal and political interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak? Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, so I will go ahead and close our public forum and move on to our consent agenda. And our first item is the minutes from the meetings held December 7th and 29th, 2020. Oh, I'm sorry, it's consent. It's consent. I apologize. I was thinking of action. Do I have a motion?
I move the board.
Go ahead.
I move the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved by Franzen, seconded by Perez. Superintendent Reisner, gifts to the district.
Yes. Danny Wilson and Toyota of Ames. And just a little bit later, I will just make a couple comments on that donation. I think it's Jeffrey Corey and LA Project Group, Collegiate United Methodist Church and Wesley Foundation, Graceway Church, United Way of Story County, Ames Town and Country Kiwanis, Sandy Bodeholt in care of Lutheran Church of Hope, Jeffrey and Deanne Barnes, Northminster Presbyterian Church, Mr. and Mrs. Mark Hempy, Sabrina Swenson, Judy Dalk and DK Sorority, Friendship Baptist Church, and an anonymous donation.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to our action items.
We have to vote, don't we?
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Okay, it's been moved by Franzen, seconded by Perez to accept the consent agenda. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, nay? Okay, passes 7-0. Okay. Action items. Our first action item is report on receipt of bids for the sale of approximately $58 million general obligation bond series 2021.
Yes, we sold $58 million of bonds at noon today. We had a very good result. I believe Tim Oswald is on the list, and he is going to give you some information on the sale. And then the next item will be the resolution directing the sale.
I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks. So as Chris mentioned, we did have bids today. There were 8 bids submitted. And the headline interest rate is 1.64%. The winning bid came from Bank of America Merrill Lynch out of New York. And you have to, the interest rate 1.6456. The second place bid came from Raymond James, which is a Florida-based broker dealer, at a rate of 1.6493. So you have to go to the third decimal place to see a difference between the first 2 bids. I'll come back to that. And if you kind of scan down the list of the bids, the last place bid had an interest rate of 1.737. So you were in the really the second decimal place to see a difference between the first and the last bid. So the bids were very good and very similar in their nature. Bank of America's the interest cost on their bid is $11,982,000. The second place bid from Raymond James interest cost is $12,006,000. There's a difference of $18,000 of interest cost between the first and the second place bid on $58 million being borrowed over 20 years. They're virtually identical bids as a practical reality. And the same is true if you scan over to the third place bid from Wells Fargo. They're $2,000 more expensive. They all saw the same thing, and it came down at the end of the day. The bids came down to how little of a fee were they willing to work for. So, in terms of I think it's a relatively easy recommendation when interest rates are this low and you have bids that are this close to each other. And so they did spend a bit of time going over the levy proofs and things like that. And we are nowhere near the $4.05 tax rate from prior years with this issue and with the prior issues. And to remind you, with this sale, you will have $2 million of authority left from the $110 million election. So this largely takes care of the authority and the funding of the high school. Maybe I should pause and ask if anybody has any questions. So one quick item, and then I'll leave you be. The interest rates on the bids, you'll notice in the years 2022 through 2029 are 5%, and then they drop down to 1.5%, and they work their way out to 2%. 5% is not the market. The bidders are paying a large premium in order to get those 5% interest or bond coupons, and so the effective interest rate works its way down to that 164. We anticipated that the bidders would bid it this way, so this had no real impact on the payment schedule or the tax levies or things like that. But I did want to make sure, in case somebody's looking at that they didn't see that number and wonder, why is that so high?
Was this about what you expected with the bids coming in?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we've seen are rates working their way downward over the last 6 months. And so when you ask that question, I kind of, the smart aleck in me wants to say, well, on what day was I expecting? Because it does kind of matter. At the 1st of December, these rates are lower than we would have seen. If you'd asked me this last week, I'd have said this is about what I would have expected.
And it's also one of the reasons why we decided to do all of the bonds at this point. We originally had scheduled only to do $50 million in this next installment, leaving $8 million for the last part of the project. And we went ahead because we knew interest rates were so low, and went ahead and decided to issue all of them, knowing that we're going to be able to expend that within 24 months as required. The other thing I wanted to highlight that, in case you didn't understand, when Tim said that they paid a premium, what that means is, although we issued $58 million of bonds, we're going to receive $62 million of revenue up front. So that's what they mean when they paid a premium. So they paid us more than what our bonds were worth, basically.
Chris or Tim, can you remind us what was the interest rate last round of bonds that were sold?
Bear with me 1 second. I will get that.
And while he's looking that up, I asked him the exact same thing, and he's going to tell you it's lower. He may be looking up the last GO bonds, but it's lower from the revenue bonds because GO bonds are just more secure, and so they aren't as high. They don't have as high interest rate as the revenue bonds that we issued in December or November, whenever we did that.
So the district last issued bonds in May of 19 at an interest rate of 2.74. And then Chris, the pool bond, bear with me one second, that we sold last fall had, what's a couple months ago now, I suppose, had an interest rate of 1.68 when you included all the fees.
And if I remember right, when we were doing all the estimation at the beginning of the project, we were using 4%, Tim, I believe.
Yeah, that sounds like something I would have done. Yeah.
To make sure that we would have enough revenue to do the project.
Correct.
And stay within the $4.05 tax rate.
So, Tim, you made a comment that this largely takes care of our authority and funding for the new high school. So would it, I'm trying to remember, we still have phase 3, which is the tearing down of the old high school and some of that would, we haven't gotten to that point, right? So is that what would be left over, Chris?
But if you recall, we issued $110 million of bonds, I'm sorry, we got authorization for $110 million of bonds, which we kind of said $5 million would be for the elementary renovations. But the high school project's $138 million. Mm-hmm. So even though we're issuing all of the bonds at this point, we still are going to have expenditures out of SAVE to finish up the high school. So it's very possible that we may have to issue additional SAVE bonds when we get further into the project. But we had just, because of the way that interest rates, we didn't want to pay any more interest than we had to. That's why we were going to break it down in 4 different bond issues. And instead we're doing 3.
And so this is the last of the GO bonds, but the rest will come from SAVE. That's what I wanted to clarify, because I knew that other portion was out there. In terms
that leaves $2 million of GO bond authority for the remaining elementary additions if we ever do them. Okay. So that authority will just stay out there until the board decides whether or not to do projects.
Okay.
Okay. And there is no vote on this item, so we will move on to item B, resolution directing the sale of approximately $58 million general obligation bonds, Series 2021.
I move to approve the resolution directing the sale of $58 million general obligation school bonds, Series 2021.
Second.
Okay, moved by Perez, seconded by, I think Bankin was one of the ones I saw, so we'll go with that. Discussion.
Thank you for your work, Chris and Tim. Appreciate it.
Yes. Okay. It's been moved by Perez, seconded by Bankin. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
We actually
Roll call
do a
vote.
roll call.
Oh, it's a roll call vote. Okay. I will go in order of the order that you are on my screen. So Director Franzen.
Franzen, aye.
Director Linkaitis.
Aye.
Director Colton.
Aye.
Director Bankin.
Aye.
Director Perez.
Aye.
Director Beerbaum.
Aye.
Director Shields Cook, aye. Passes 7-0. Item C, 2021-22 school board meeting schedule.
I move the board approve the 2021-22 school board meeting schedule as presented.
Second.
Okay, moved by Perez, seconded by Colton. Discussion. Eric, do you want to go ahead and open that up? Yeah, and we discussed this last time, so anybody have questions or comments?
I don't have a question. We will be adding a retreat to this, correct?
Correct. In
Okay, that's what I thought.
June, I believe, right? Yes.
Yes, in June.
Okay.
I don't know if we have that date nailed down yet, though.
No, I don't think we do. And I might be part of the holdup for that.
Okay.
We will get it soon.
No worries.
Okay. It was moved by Perez, seconded by Colton. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Non-completion prevention report.
All right, I'm happy to hop in at this stage if that's okay.
We'll do a motion first there, Dr. Hawkins.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I move the board approve the 2021-22 modified supplemental amount application for dropout prevention and the budget proposal as presented.
Second.
Moved by Linkaitis, seconded by Colton, and we'll turn it over to Dr. Hawkins.
Sorry, I'm just so excited to tell you about it. As we've done in the past, this is an annual report that is due to the state in order to secure funds for prevention of students pushed and pulled out of our system. And so one of the obligations of the district, if they would choose to receive the funds that the state offers, is to have 25% matching funds from our general fund, which you can see here in the summary is $516,185. Those funds are used by the district to fund its programming to prevent students from being pushed and pulled out of our system in 3 primary ways. Those are described under the programming section through our alternative learning program, through our school and family counselors, and through our success program. Primarily, funds are spent on staffing. And there is a portion of this review that reviews the data. We do have a district goal to reduce the number of students pushed and pulled out of our system. You can see that our most recent data from last year was that 22 students did not, I don't want to use the language didn't complete, because there's a difference between a non-completer of graduation and a student who is pushed or pulled out. But there were 22 students, grades 7 through 12, who were pushed or pulled out of our system. That's for a rate of not quite 1% of that student body. Again, that's based on our 712 population. And you can see then the other table, the bottom table there, describes the number of students receiving services, as well as the projected number of students receiving services. That projected number is also a required data point or submission for our state. So I'd be happy to take any questions that the board has about this funding source or the programming that it supports.
Director Hawkins, this is just, I think this will be a good teachable moment. Would you mind refresh us and the public as well, what the difference between the push out and the pull out?
Yes, very good. So I appreciate that opportunity. To be clear with the board and our community, the state does use the language dropout. So they would call this dropout prevention funding. Of course, we have had conversations at our system that is a term that puts the onus on our students. And so rather than using that term, we have adopted language in our system that mirrors the research from the National Dropout Prevention Center, which is push out and pull out. So that national organization, which does research and prevention work on dropout throughout the nation, has identified reasons that students are pulled away from our system, those factors that influence their choices about their situations and their educational progress that are outside of school, that pull them away from school. Sometimes those are things like jobs. Sometimes those are things like having to take care of family situations. Sometimes those are things like drugs. There's a list of things that the National Dropout Prevention Center has identified as issues that pull kids from school. Additionally, that organization has identified things that push kids away from school, things that are happening within school that then push students away from their educational experience. Those things might be bullying, pervasive lack of academic success, again, there's a variety of issues that happen inside school. So we use the language of push out, pull out to identify, to recognize that there's factors that both pull kids away from us and push kids away from us, trying not to put the onus, of course, on the kids.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity to explain that.
Any other questions for Dr. Hawkins? Okay, it was moved by Linkaitis, seconded by Colton. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Okay, item E, modified allowable growth request to the School Budget Review Committee, Grandwood Program Consortium Special Education Administrative Costs.
So we participate in the consortiums
Sorry,
at.
Can I make a motion?
Sorry.
A motion.
Sorry.
It's my fault. I keep reading the item.
I move the board authorize the administration to request from the School Budget Review Committee modified allowable growth in the amount of approximately $11,405.29 for special education administration costs at the Grandwood Program Consortium.
Second.
So we participate in the consortiums at Woodward Granger School District. As part of a consortium, they can apply for allowable growth for administrative costs. They put a consolidated application into the School Budget Review Committee, and each participating school district has to have their board approve their portion. We do this every year.
Any questions for Chris? Okay, it was moved by Franzen, seconded by Linkaitis. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. New high school change orders.
I move the board approve the change orders for the New Ames High School project as presented.
Second.
Was that a second from Bankin?
Yes.
Okay, moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Bankin. Discussion. Are there questions on anything here? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Mitchell Elementary additions change order number 3.
I move the board approve change order number 3 for the Mitchell Elementary additions and remodel project to Lane Construction Group in the amount of an additional $18,425.
Second.
Second.
Moved by Linkaitis, seconded by Franzen. Discussion. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Board and staff items. We will start out with items from the board.
A couple of things I actually need to tell the board. Well, actually, the first item is for the district. I want to thank you so much for the message that you sent out earlier, talking about the insurrection and sedition that's happening in our state's capital, in our nation's capital. I appreciate that you did that. I appreciate that we have all been able to come together as a group and still, be a forward-looking group in all the midst of all this chaos. But I didn't want to let today pass and not acknowledge my gratitude that the district did acknowledge this going on. So thank you. I have some feedback for the board. I was invited to speak to a student group at Ames Middle School. I think this was in December. It feels like 20 years ago. And they gave me feedback specifically to give back to you. And so I've been telling them, I promised them that I would tell you. So I have feedback from the students as well as from the teacher who invited me. And so they were talking about hybrid versus 100% in person. And there was a spectrum of responses. So the students were in grade 6, 7th, and 8th. And some were they were in hybrid at the time, and some were in, I think 1 or 2 was in 100% remote. There was a spectrum of experiences, some good, some bad, but they wanted you to know that for some of them, they find that the hybrid schedule is just hard to get used to because of the lack of routine. They also are some of them reported being very upset that their friends were on the other day than they were. They did not like that. They also said that for them, asking questions in an online environment was somehow different and more embarrassing than in class. And so they found that that was actually a barrier to their participation. When it came to the synchronous courses or the way in which the courses were self-paced, some really liked it, but others really hated it. So there was really no middle ground about the self-pacing aspect. In terms of moving to 100% in person, some students wanted you to know they felt that would just be better for instruction. They said that would provide them opportunities to ask questions in the moment from their teachers, which is something they feel is missing from the online environment. And then the students wanted you to know, well, one of the things they reported was a difference in the needs of structure and motivation. Some students said that they felt like if there wasn't a teacher forcing them to do it, they just wouldn't do it. And so they had a lot of missing work, even though that wasn't normally how they did their work, because there just wasn't anybody forcing them to do it. Or if they could just put it off, they would. So some students said they liked that. Other students said they didn't. I said that I would pass that on. The one student who was 100% remote said that she absolutely loved it. And she was upset about, there was conversation about people coming back to hybrid. She was upset about being forced to come back. And so we had a conversation where the message that the students were hearing when we used the language of everybody's coming back face to face, the students who are in the remote option are hearing that they're going to all be coming back together. And so she was very upset that she was being forced to leave this learning mode that she really liked. So I clarified that was not the case. And the students overall said that they wanted to hear from the admin, from the administration and the board directly. So the way I'm reinterpreting that is they feel like they're being talked about, but not being talked to. And so they feel like they haven't heard from us. They're not necessarily hearing directly from the principals. They feel like they're hearing bits and pieces here and there. They want to be communicated with directly. And then the teacher wanted to share, they appreciated all the stuff that the board has been doing. They understand all the things we've had to navigate. But they said from their perspective, when the students are in person in the hybrid environment, they felt there was perhaps an over-reliance on the use of videos versus instruction. And just an overall concern for screen time. So they really appreciated the opportunity to have me be able to bring their voices directly to the board. I promised I would do it, and I hope that you found some of that useful.
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Okay, items from the superintendent. Superintendent Reisner.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a minute. Wilson Toyota continues to be just a really strong supporter of our district. Tonight we approved a donation from them. But in the past, what I listed there that they do yearly donations for their scoreboard sponsorship, the Booster Club sponsorship. They help with post-prom and have given a lot to DECA, and they are working with Valerie on Leader in Me, some money for that. One of the things I thought was really cool about this latest donation was they specifically wanted some of it to be used for diversity training or some equity training. So I just wanted to give them just kind of a shout out because we sure do appreciate their partnership and their giving to our high school. The next item was just an update on SROs. We had a joint meeting, several of our equity committee members and some of the both of our SROs, the chief, some other city people, and had our first kind of joint meeting to discuss the data that or the research that Director Benkin had collected and shared with the Equity Committee. I think one of the really important things in us having that joint meeting was to share with them that there was never any the paper, while it was accurate, it may have not portrayed the tone of the meeting or the way that the meeting ended. So we were in no position as an equity committee to make a recommendation to the board. We have lots more work to do. And so this meeting really was our first of probably what will be many to discuss really what the SRO program, what is the intent of it, what is the purpose, what's the mission of it, and where do we go from here? And so I think one of the takeaways for me of that meeting was we really do have a lot of work to do in this area because I don't think any of us are really on the same page. Those SROs are doing a phenomenal job without a lot of the guidance that maybe we wish there was, or even what is the purpose behind that. So we're going to continue to explore this as a equity committee. We have a meeting this week where we will give the whole equity committee the update, and then we'll have a follow-up meeting after that, another joint meeting. But I really think we're in this place where the data or the research is telling us that that we may need to look at a different delivery model for some of the services that are provided by our SROs. And so we'll continue to explore this and meet with the city and the police department. Director Benkin, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I would just make clear that everyone involved in the meeting was really on the same page. And I think that's what I was really surprised about. The police chief and all of the assistants, city manager, and everyone was just adamant that they did not want to be involved in any unintended consequences, and that they were really willing to do whatever they could to modify the program. And if it couldn't be modified in a way that was effective, then of course we should agree to part ways. So I just appreciated the willingness to partner in a sincere way. And I wanted to be sure the board understood that.
Definitely. Thank you for adding that. I appreciate it. Definitely. All right. And then
I just have a quick question
about that.
On that, do we know, or is there a target day for when the board would receive a recommendation from the equity committee?
You know, we haven't set a target date. So why don't we take that question back to the committee? I think it would be a good discussion point. We haven't set a date.
And I think we probably need to have a discussion about that actual process, because there really isn't anything for the board to vote on, because these are district issues, not necessarily board issues, right? So we don't vote on whether or not the district has SROs or not, other than when we vote on the budget, they're either in or they're not.
Right. So then so there will be no recommendation from the equity committee. What will not to the board per se?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that part of what we would do is kind of keep the board apprised and in the loop and involved and engaged, and have opportunities to give us feedback whenever the district is at a decision point. But technically, the board doesn't have any say in how the district staffs its unit.
So then, are we saying that the target date would be when we approve the budget? Would that be?
So I think Eric might have mentioned this. It might be JD, and I'm sorry, I can't remember, that the contract expires 2024. Is that correct, Superintendent Reisner?
Yeah, I think, Chris, we hadn't had a chance to discuss this, but 2024 is the expiration. I believe there's a yearly review period, though, so it can be reviewed every year.
Either party can give notice by January 1st to terminate the agreement effective July 1st, the following July 1st.
And so, but part of what I think the committee is doing now is figuring out, because there was some concern about what would happen in terms of the district's availability to receive effective service promptly if we were not under contract. And so figuring out, is there a way in which these officers could perhaps be used in a different way? And that might be something that actually comes back to the board for approval. I'm not sure, or that might then fall under a different committee or that kind of stuff. So we're still not sure yet.
Okay, because I had misunderstood. So I'm glad I asked this question, because I had understood that the committee was doing that, and then it will come back to us, to the board, for should we have or should we not. So this is a great teaching moment for myself, and because we keep receiving emails about like advocating for keeping them more. So I think it would be super beneficial to clarify exactly what the role of the board as a whole is in this piece.
You know, that's a great point. And Director Colton, I use the word recommendation. I think we all do. So it is confusing. And so at our next equity committee meeting, I think we really do need to set kind of what is the timeline going to look like moving forward, and at what points are we going to do some checkpoints at the board meeting, and that kind of thing. So we can probably explore that this week. Director Benkin, I don't know if the agenda has been posted, but
it has been, but I think we can absolutely talk about deliverables, okay, that kind of stuff, because I think that's the other thing. I think even the district does not want to be the sole decider, right? Even though technically they legally have the authority to make that decision, I think we want, what I'm not speaking on behalf of the district, but at least from my perspective, in terms of the board perspective, is it would be great if we could have this conversation really as a community, right? Because I think it's important and will be meaningful, because what we are hoping to do is give guidance on what an effective intervention or an evidence-based intervention would look like. And then that's where the board would come in terms of different staffing, right? Bringing in more counselors, bringing in more social workers and all that kind of stuff. And so that's really where the board piece would come in, because it's not just whether or not the SROs stay or go, because what really is going to happen is their role will probably just change and maybe evolve, but we'll need to replace the need that they were serving. And that's where the board's input and support will really be meaningful.
I think it's kind of, it's a gray area still, because we are still trying to determine what roles are they playing and where would there be gaps. And so if we didn't have SROs, where are those gaps? And I am as a superintendent, I am in no way feeling ready to make any decision about SROs right now. I have some research. I have some, just have met one time with the SROs and the police department. I mean, I'm really not yet feeling like I'm in a position that I could make that decision yet. So I think more work has to go into this. I think it's a really important decision, and one that we need to get right as we move forward. So I feel like we need to spend the time to do it right. Any other questions on that? I'm glad you asked that question. That's good. Okay. Update on remote campus. This will be quick. I just wanted to provide you with the information that we are continuing to plan for a remote campus for next school year. We would offer a full remote campus at that point, and we are excited about kind of the direction that we're going. And we really feel like this year has given us a lot of information and knowledge on some things that work and some things that don't work. And we feel like, I like how Director Mixdorf says it. She says, we have the bones in place. And so now we're really looking to enhance it and And so we've had some conversations with the Department of Education as well as other online providers in Iowa that have approved programs. And we are continuing to meet every week and push this forward. So more information will keep coming. And I'm sure the Teaching and Learning Committee will get a really extensive report as we get some of those details hammered out. And so that is what I have tonight.
I just had a quick question on that. So can we expect with this remote campus, it will go through teaching and learning, or can we expect it to come forward as a discussion item at some point for questions and things?
And with Christy not being here.
No, yep, yeah. And that's why I don't want to
positive.
ask questions because it's under.
It's okay.
It's on the agenda, but I just.
It's on the agenda.
Yeah, but I just wondered if that opportunity is going to be presented to the board to create a better understanding of around this work and, your objective with it, your vision with it.
Yep.
Those are some of the things going through my mind. That's all I want.
So, and I would say our objective and vision, because it's definitely a joint.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I anticipate that going through the Teaching and Learning Committee first.
Okay.
For the vetting and some discussion around that. And then it would come to the board in a discussion item.
Okay, thanks. That's all
you bet.
I was interested in. So.
Yeah, you bet.
Right. Any other questions for Superintendent Reisner? Okay. Board planning calendar. We have a work session scheduled for January 25th at 5:30. And I believe that is the one on open meetings, correct, Superintendent Reisner? And then we will have a regular board meeting to follow that.
Can I ask a question here?
I think so. Great.
On the calendar under agenda setting, it looks like there's initials next to it, and I would imagine that's the board member who's participating, other than Sabrina and me. But I see lots of MLs.
And I see that's a good point. I didn't notice that, but I see SSCs on there as well. So I'm guessing maybe that just hasn't been updated.
I think it was updated though, because I thought I saw somehow we got notification of when we come.
We did. So maybe it just wasn't updated on this document.
Yeah, that might
I'll check into it.
Okay.
JD doesn't have the ability to speak at this point. So I will check into it and I'll email you all.
I just wanted to make sure the people had the opportunity to participate.
Thank you. I'll make sure. Appreciate that.
Thanks. Anything else on the board planning calendar?
So there's no work session this week?
No special board meeting this week.
Meeting again for 2 weeks.
We may need to have a special board meeting to make a recommendation to return the secondary students. We would do that probably on Monday. I did send a hold date, and that would be this next Monday, which would be
the 18th.
Thank you, 18th. So I put a hold on that. That would give us time to kind of see what the governor's shares with us and do any tweaking if we find out information. I'm not sure the depth that we'll find out, but it also gives us time to kind of look and monitor the conditions as well. So I would anticipate a special board meeting Monday night, and Monday is Martin Luther King Day, and there is a 6:30 community program. And so I had originally put that meeting for 5:30, and we may want to move that meeting up if at all possible I changed it to 5:15, but we may even want to shoot for 5 if it's possible. So we will get that nailed down and sent out.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Franzen, seconded by Perez. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Have a good night, everyone.
Night, everyone.